Tourette's podcast is not a medical advice show. It's a show about experiences. In the course of that, we may talk about medications or therapies or stories from the doctor's office, but don't mistake any of that for medical advice or direction. It's not. Get that only from people or places licensed or certified to give it. Not from a massively fun and action-packed podcast about our life experiences, such as.
But I just thought, no more. And so I worked with my agent. We contacted a couple of the publications over here in the UK to begin with. And the story has now been picked up by 7 of the major newspapers in the UK, with 2 stories out on, I think, the Mail Online and HuffPost, and then 5 more, which will come out over the coming week.
This is Tourette's podcast, made possible with support of the Tourette Association of America and part of the Geeks Rising Network. Lewis, Daisy, Angel, Nomad, Tyler, John, Kyle, Bryson, Christine, Amanda, Justin, Renata, Carter, Shyla, Hara, Brian, Ellis, and the quality guest we have coming up are the people who directly made Season 5 by coming on an episode of Tourette's podcast and opening up for the power of relatability with lesser-told stories. These are all guests who either have Tourette syndrome or have lives directly involved with it. So some of our guests were Tourette doctors and researchers, for instance. So this is the finale episode of Season 5. I'm going to take a break and focus on some other things for a bit, but starting work on Season 6 at some point in the not-too-distant future. And speaking of, so a little while back, I put out a survey question, just a feedback thing, asking what you think Tourette's podcast needs. Like, Tourette's podcast would be better if, and what comes to mind. And about 85% of the feedback was just to keep it going, keep finding people to talk to so I can listen. So that's where the vast majority of you were, and the remaining 15%, so really just a few of you, were specific about wanting more celebrity guests, and a certain few of you said more teenagers. All good. Going to try to honor all of that. I'm all about it. But I'm, I guess, really comforted by the... So I guess I get self-conscious about asking a lot of the same questions episode to episode, but the guests that we do bring on really end up taking them in new directions, these questions. And that's really where it gets fascinating, because in the context of Tourette syndrome or the context of anything that makes you feel vulnerable, you can listen to a different walk of life tell a different story than your own. But because of the common backdrop, somehow it helps us to understand one another more easily, while also having new things to think about, if that makes any sense. So, I don't know, thanks. The plan is to continue improving without radical changes. And when the Tourette Association of America came on as the primary sponsor, I think at the start of last season, they said something similar, just keep it going. By the way, the support they've given the podcast is truly preserving it. So tell them thank you if you enjoy these episodes. But the invitation stands for you if you want to send me an email, tourettespodcast@gmail.com, and suggest something new or a new type of question that I'm not asking that you've had on your mind. Or if I got something wrong even. If you heard something that was flat out incorrect that I said, let me know that too so I can run a correction. We did pretty well this season incorporating more science and advocacy. Dr. John Walkup talked us through anxiety and why we experience it to begin with. That episode definitely helped me personally. Dr. Christine Canalia talked about the state of Tourette research and how the science community wants to directly involve the Tourette community more for patient-centered research and outcomes. Amanda Talty, the president and CEO of the Tourette Association, came on to recap the virtual conference from this year, the TAA conference, and talk more about what the Tourette Association has available for you. More science and research and medicine and advocacy ahead because that's something more of you demanded. But for the most part, it was all just a hangout. It's me, somebody who has Tourette syndrome, talking with a stranger who also has Tourette syndrome. No script, no plan, no real structure, just talking about what we've been through and how we've dealt with it, and how often that experience creates the kind of people we are. Some people have told me they've learned to love and appreciate their own specific Tourette context, and others totally hate it and want it cured today. Respect to both camps. I just want to hear from you and talk and learn. If you listen to episode 0 of this season, you know that I've gone through some things, hospitalization as well, and as it goes with health and mental health, you keep working on it, and this podcast, no doubt, this season has been a major part of my health, recovery, rejuvenation, expression, and time with community. And every week, every guest, it's like I'm listening to someone who's holding a mirror. Anyway, thank you, all of you, for real. I want to keep thanking you, but I want to get to our conversation this week. This one is so much fun. Aidy Smith is our guest. He's in the profession of wines and spirits and is a central figure in the Three Drinkers. That's the great documentary series on Amazon Prime, exploring spirits, whiskey, and it's a primo quality show. I know a lot of you are well aware of Aidy already. And the media has given him a lot of focus too for opening up about the fact that he has Tourette syndrome, something that doesn't always cross paths with the world of sommeliers. Sorry for the slippery pronunciation of that word. So this episode is all about how Aidy got into turning his knowledge of wine and spirits and other drinks into a fulfilling career, and what Tourette syndrome's got to do with it. If you, the listener, have any sensitivity to conversations about alcoholic beverages, we do discuss some of that ahead, but it's from a passion angle, appreciation of the craft and art forms and the history of it. And the bottom line for Aidy is very humanly, don't be a snob. Don't assume you know what I'm going to enjoy. That's how he approaches things. This is such a great one, a perfect one to close out on. Here's me and Aidy Smith.
Thank you so much for inviting me on. Had a little bit of a dilemma 5 minutes ago. Was all ready and raring to go with the margaritas. Went into the freezer. One piece of ice remaining. It's the biggest dilemma for a mixologist, that no ice. And so I'm a bit ashamed that I had no more in my freezer. So I've got a glass of Chinese wine, actually a rosé, a Blanc de Noir, which is basically white Cabernet Sauvignon from China, which is awesome. It's really nice.
Is it unusual for China to be the basis for something like that?
Massively. I mean, China predominantly has been known for really mass-produced, poor-quality wines, but that is changing hugely over the past kind of 2 years. And what you're seeing is some really good winemakers actually going out there with the mission to try and create some great wine. But they've got the climate and the soil, and now they've got the skill. There's some really cool stuff happening.
What was the changing point for that happening, as of like 2 years ago?
I think just China as a country, there's a lot of wealth in China, and with that wealth, when I say a lot of wealth, I suppose if you were to do a kind of ratio, there's a lot of disparage between that. There's a rich and the poor, basically. But
Right.
Those who are rich out there love wine. And so they go to, all corners of the world, Burgundy, Bordeaux, Napa, all these places that are renowned for their wine. And they would purchase this great wine. And so I guess a couple of people over there thought, why aren't we making good wine in our own country? And so instead of, some people in China are now getting degrees in viticulture and winemaking skills and doing it themselves, but they'll bring in a lot of that skill at this moment to teach other people how to do it. Because although China has been making wine for many years, it's only just recently started to become, taken really seriously. And I'm going to do a blind tasting next week with 6 wines, 5 of the most kind of incredible optimum wines from a different country. So in America, it'll be something like Opus One. In Bordeaux in France, it'll be something like Lafite, like really high-end wines. And I'm going to do those blind against a Chinese wine, top Chinese wine, and see how they'll come out. That'll be very interesting.
Nice. Is that something you do frequently? This is your profession. How often are you called in to do something like that?
I mean, I suppose it depends. A lot of wine regions and a lot of wineries are fighting to get a wine writer or a wine journalist to try their wines, because once I write about something, people will see that, and then they'll hopefully go out and want to explore it. But wine is such an interesting world, because you might ask me, well, Aidy, what's a good wine?
Yeah.
And to be honest with you, the answer to that is a good wine is a wine that you personally enjoy. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that a particular wine you're going to love because it's amazing, because everyone's tastes are so subjective. And you might hate really big, bold wines, whereas I love them. And so just because I think it's good doesn't necessarily mean that you will, which is why point scores, I'm not a big believer in point scores.
So I've been kind of recording in the background here just to kind of set the levels and everything, but this is stuff I want to hit anyway. I mean, this is enjoyable to talk about.
Great.
And even though we haven't formally, kind of started things or started the interview or anything like that, this is all kind of part of it, and it's something I'm fascinated with. So do you want to just dive into it from here?
Yeah, let's do it.
Well, so just for the record, state your name and the general part of the world that you call home.
I am Aidy Smith, and I live in London in the United Kingdom.
So I would love for you to, and just kind of continuing from there, to tell anybody in the audience who may not be aware about the Three Drinkers. I mean, it's a really beautiful show, and I guess you could kind of categorize it as a sort of quest type of show, or curiosity, discovery. So it's a show about three friends who travel to interesting or storied sources of wine and spirits. And on the surface, someone might describe it as a show about drinking, but clearly it's more than that. I'd love for you to kind of give us a primer on it.
I love that. I think honestly, you couldn't have done a better job. You summed up so well. The Three Drinkers. It is a quest of discovery, as you've said. We travel around the world seeking out not just the best drinks, but the people, the places, the culture, the food, everything that is encapsulated with the world of the glass. So we started off our adventure in series one, traveling over to Scotland to discover the world famous Scotch whiskey. And we delved into everything from those whiskies from the Highlands and the people making them and the really unique blends that they do and how casks are put together, to traveling out to Ireland and Jura, to incredible little isles where there's in Jura more deer than people. I can't remember the exact, I think it was around 16,000 deer and about 212 people.
Wow. So but presenting on wine and spirits is, it's a profession for you and obviously a passion, and you have a great following online. Where did this kind of thing begin for you? Is there a family origin with the subject of drinks, or what's your connection?
Well, when I was at university, I decided to take a placement year, and I'd always wanted to work in the States ever since I managed to get myself onto a politics field trip over to the USA, even though I never studied politics when I was 16. And so ever since that moment, I thought, you know what, I need to work in the USA. And so at 20, I ended up getting a kind of placement year, I suppose is what you call it, in between a graduate scheme and an internship. And I was lucky enough to, a lot of hard work and probably about 6,000 emails. It wasn't easy to get it, but I ended up getting a placement over in San Francisco. And I just turned 21 when I arrived. And it just so happened that there was a networking event for my university in San Francisco on the very day that I'd arrived. And this kind of thing never, ever happened.
Wow.
And so I took opportunity and advantage of it after traveling for about 60 hours because the first flight was canceled. And I opened the door to this networking event, and this chap just walks up to me and goes, "Hi, I'm Steve. You need a glass of wine." And I'm like, "Oh, I like this guy." Turns out that Steve, same university, same course, same college within the university, 25 years before me. And he grew up 4 miles down the road from where I did. And he had one of Silicon Valley's only urban wineries called Three Arches. And so I ended up just getting to know these guys really well. They took me in as their nephew. And every weekend, I just kind of follow and shadow them and watch what they were doing. It was fascinating. And it was from there that I just began to absolutely fall in love with wine and spirits.
How old were you at that point when Steve walked up to you?
I just turned 21. So it was, serendipity for me, because coming from the UK where I'd been drinking for, quite a while, going over to the US, I was quite worried that, oh goodness, am I going to get carded or ID'd or let into places? But I just turned 21, thankfully, so that wasn't an issue anymore.
So I like that you have this, and I've seen it written too, as you have kind of like an anti-snobbery approach, and you referenced that earlier, that it's such a subjective experience. It would be a shame if somebody was talked out of something that they might naturally enjoy. Is that something you were shown or taught, or is that something that is just kind of your personal ethos that you were able to kind of weave into this? Because the stereotype obviously is snobbery, and if you dig deeper, I'm sure you find experts left and right who were just kind of all about the personal connection to it. But what are your thoughts on that?
I think the wine world is still sadly quite driven by snobbery, and it is a very middle class, white male dominated space.
Yeah.
And so recently it's been fantastic to put the spotlight on a hell of a lot more diversity within the industry. There are some incredible Asian sommeliers and Indian sommeliers, for example. There's some absolutely amazing Jewish owned wineries that are creating some phenomenal kosher wine. And there are Black owned distilleries all across the world. And up until recently, there's just been this stigma that, oh, yeah, it's only kind of white middle-aged men who are producing great wine or
Right.
producing great spirits. And that kind of thinking has to come to an end. And I guess it falls in a way into the same category of people with disabilities being in the wine world. I mean, firstly, as a gay man, I know very few people in the LGBTQ plus community who are working openly within the wine industry, more so in the spirits industry. It's a
Mm.
bit more open, but there's still snobbery. And second of all, people having disabilities,
Hmm.
it's just something you don't really see. I mean,
Yeah.
if you thought about someone with Tourette's, for example, being a sommelier and walking up to a table and addressing customers there, restaurants, that's the last thing they'll want because they'll become embarrassed.
Yeah.
And so, people who have something, people who have a disability are often very much overlooked in this world and in this kind of space. I would say that the first thing that I try to never associate myself as, and a lot of people do because it's just the go-to word, is I never say I'm a wine expert. And my whole ethos is I'm not going to lead you. I'm not going to say, hey, come follow me. Let me show you what you'll like. I say, hey, why don't we do this at the same time? Let's
Hmm.
go on this journey together and just figure it out simultaneously. Because I don't know everything that there is to know about wine. I mean, there's thousands and thousands of grape varieties across the world. And I'm still on my journey. And I'll be talking to Helena and Colin, my two co-presenters, who've been doing this a lot longer than me. And every day I learn something from them. And they still now will learn things from me as well that they didn't know. It's just such a vast, big world. And as you pointed out earlier, for me to say, you know what, Ben, this wine you will love. If I
Yeah.
know the types of wines that you like, I'll get it spot on because I'll figure out your palate and I'll tell you exactly what I think you'll like. And I hopefully you will. But for me to walk up to a stranger and say, this is a great wine, you'll love it, without knowing anything about what you actually enjoy, yeah, that's not good territory. So point scores on wines, I am always very, cautious about that. I would always say read the tasting notes before you ever buy a wine, just to make sure it sounds like something you'd enjoy.
I, I love that because there's like an epistemology there, and it's like the sort of approach of what you know is not necessarily as important as how you know what you know. And the same thing. I'm a photographer, and in the camera industry, well, I'd say in the photography community, same thing. There's a lot of just sort of nonsensical brand loyalty and one-upsmanship, and my gear is fancier than yours. And my approach has been that cameras are not professional, photographers are, and I don't care about the tools you use. But if you do something that's appealing or at least rewarding to yourself, that's the measure of success that I care about. And I love that where you can just kind of find for yourself, if it's not mainstream or if it's something that's a complete quirk that you can just only associate with yourself. There's something really nice about just discovering something that you truly can embrace and find a connection with that's based on your own terms and not somebody else. And there was the media piece on you about your life with Tourette. I mean, was that the first time that most people came to know this about you, that you have Tourette?
I would say that my nearest and dearest, who I've been at school, university, and whatnot, family, of course, they knew. But because over the years I've managed to kind of calm it so much, a lot of people in my circle professionally, and especially people who've watched the show and the amazing community who've come from watching the show to be a part of my life, yeah, no one really knew anything about it.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was my way. I just read a story online about another kid who'd been bullied because of their Tourette. And I thought, no, I can't just sit here anymore and keep the silence on it. And it's something that a lot of people are very wary about. And I'm sure there's a lot of other people out there who have it who haven't come forward because
Oh
they're
yeah,
scared about, their career, their profession, dating life, all these things.
absolutely.
But I just thought, no more. And so I worked with my agent. We contacted a couple of the publications over here in the UK to begin with. And the story has now been picked up by 7 of the major newspapers in the UK, with
Wow.
2 stories out on, I think, the Mail Online and HuffPost, and then 5 more, which will come out over the coming weeks. So fantastic. And I'm really happy that the media industry have picked up on this because it shows that they recognize it's something that needs to be discussed as well. So that makes me very happy.
And it diversifies the portrayals of it too. Sometimes people have kind of a one-dimensional or narrow view of what Tourette is, and bringing in more voices, personalities, walks of life, and especially people who we know as experts. I mean, it's kind of a shame that we have to kind of qualify ourselves ahead of time to be taken seriously, but giving people these, especially within the Tourette community too, there's a lot of anxiety about it. And when parents find out that their child has Tourette or has a Tourette diagnosis coming up, there's so much anxiety about, God, is life over, or is he going to become something, or is this just going to be a serious problem that's going to follow our whole family out through the rest of our lives, or what? And just kind of calming that by being really open about our stories and telling them, like we are here, is really important for people to hear within the Tourette community and outside the Tourette community.
Well, you know what? On that point, Ben, as well, someone got in touch with me after I published the first article, someone I have known for years in the industry. And they got in touch, sent me an email and just said, I shed a bit of a tear, but a tear of relief when you wrote that, when I read that article, because my son has started developing some tics and we think that he may very well have Tourette.
Wow.
And having known you, Aidy, for the past however many years, seeing what you've done and having absolutely no idea that you had Tourette syndrome just makes me feel so much comfort that my son, when he grows up, it's not the end of the world at all by any means, the opposite. And I've heard you say as well, Ben, in the past that, and this is an idea I think both of us very much believe, people who have Tourette syndrome, when they find something that they seriously enjoy doing, and it's kind of that really big passion, because we have so much excess energy that would otherwise go into those tics, it diverts itself straight and redirects itself straight into whatever that passion is. And so we end up putting all that extra focus and all that extra energy into that one thing, which just completely sets us apart from everyone else. We just raise the bar because all that energy goes into fulfilling our goal. And, I like to call it a superpower. That's kind of the messaging that I'm putting out across all these articles. It's Tourette syndrome is not a weakness. It's a superpower.
I had a conversation yesterday with someone basically about this same thing, that when you kind of group with yourself and you see yourself on your own terms and you know what your talents are, you don't have to see, when you're in social situations, sometimes, you're putting on other people's eyes and you're kind of judging yourself that way. And, you can really psych yourself out. It's a big crisis of confidence. But when you have this energy, and especially if you have some time to yourself and you can kind of cultivate your skills and just practice and practice, I know that's something I've always done, where when I find something that I'm interested in and may be good at, I kind of obsessively dive into it and I want to research it. I want to know everything about it. I want to practice it. I think to the normal person, I say normal in quotes, but that it's a tiring exercise, but it's really fulfilling. And I feel like it is, if you think about all the greats, and this is not to sound pompous or anything, but if you think about the people who've really kind of achieved, and we know them for their achievements, they've kind of gone about it a similar way. They just have a natural connection and they seek it out and they cultivate it and grow it. And a lot of that is isolation time. And a lot of that is expulsion of energy. And it can be, from the outside, I think it just looks obsessive and unhealthy, but it's the best thing I've ever done, is to kind of position myself to where I feel good about the work I'm doing. And the work I'm doing is something I truly actually love. And it helps me to kind of manage my TS in my daily life.
100%. And, what did Warren Buffett say when they asked him why he's achieved so much? He put it all down to focus, didn't he?
Right.
He just said, what's the number one thing that has led to your success? Focus. And I mean, that's something that we struggle greatly with. But when we find that one thing that we enjoy doing, I suppose there's a couple of things that we could enjoy doing, but one of those things, that focus is there in abundance. So spot on.
It's almost like the ADHD exists like a being that's just kind of searching for all these things, and it's flipping through all these things in your mind, and it's difficult to focus on any one thing because it hasn't found it yet. And then you finally get to it and you find it, and it's like, okay, there it is. Focus on this. You got it. I'm going to take a back seat now, and you can control yourself. And, I'm obviously not speaking from a scientific point of view, but that's how it's always felt, is that when I find the right groove, my problems just kind of take a break and my tics don't bother me. And I mean, is that something you kind of relate to?
100%. Yeah. I think when I'm by myself and I'm figuring that out and I'm in the zone, they are almost gone completely. I mean, for me, it's when I'm on camera. If I'm on camera, on video, this podcast, whenever I'm talking, doing an action, or I'm focusing on one thing, my tics are completely gone.
Mm-hmm.
It's the before and after where the nerves are there a little bit, just before we're about to say action. At that point, the tics are there because it's a nerving experience. We film in public a lot. And there's little corners off on the side so members of the public can't come in. But you've got a lot of people watching you,
right.
Especially when we go to little towns that have, this distillery that's been there for the past 300 years. And all the local residents come out because this is the biggest thing that's happened in the town.
Right.
Like there's a TV show there. There's an Amazon Prime TV show there. Oh, my goodness. And so there's a lot of stress there. But as soon as the cameras are on, as soon as action has been said, you are just in that zone.
We talk about the comorbids a lot, ADHD, OCD, sleep issues, things like that all kind of seem to tie in, at least for a lot of people who have TS. Is that something you have to kind of juggle with too?
Yeah, I'd say so. I mean, my co-presenters and co-directors of the company, of the TV series, bless them, because I'm definitely very anal about things and I'm always trying to be a perfectionist. And so I think sometimes we need that 70% rule where you do things to the best of your ability, but sometimes you just got to chill out a little bit,
right,
so that everyone doesn't lose their mind. In terms of sleep, yes. I mean, I'm lucky in that over the years, I've developed what I call coping mechanisms, as many people with TS have, to just try and put some balance in their life. For me, 30 minutes to 40 minutes before I sleep, that's I just love that part of the day.
Mm-hmm.
I get an app out. So right now I'm using Breathe, Breethe. And there's two people on there, I can't remember the names, who do hypnosis, sleep hypnosis. There's one guy who I find really annoying because he pauses way too much in between his talking. And so at that point, my irritation comes out. But there's two people. There's an American lady and a British chap. And they just have such a calming voice. And it's that kind of 30, 40-minute period of the day where I can wind down. And, when you've got twitches, especially, and vocal tics at night, they can keep you up. But if you do this hypnosis and you calm each part of your body down from your little toe all the way to your, tummy, all the way to your neck, to your head, and your whole body just feels like it's floating, you can drift off. And so I suppose that what I'd say to anyone listening who is having difficulty sleeping, try hypnosis before you go to bed. Try one of these meditation apps because it has changed my life. It really has.
Yeah, that's a recent discovery for me, is meditation, yoga, things like that, which I haven't been as disciplined about as I should be. Sometimes I just forget to do it. It's my brain is just going and going, and I find new tasks for myself. And then I look at the clock and it's already like 1 a.m. and I'm like, oh God, and I still feel wired and ready to go. But there are things I can do, procedural things I can do, dimming the lights and just kind of setting the tone. But if you do find just that right formula and the calming voices, I mean, the yoga instructor I was with had this amazing voice that just got in my head and completely put the blinders on. It's important to remember to just to think to do that kind of thing, because I don't enough. I just end up being on this mode where I just don't slow myself down.
And I think that when we are working really hard, we can have a bit of a tic flare up as well. When there's a bit of frustration or annoyance, or we don't quite get something, there's the irritation there. And it's at that point where, and I fall victim to this all the time because I never do it. I just try and continue and then I'm not as productive. But it's at that point, you should just take a step back, take that 10 minutes to sit down, do a little meditation, do a little breathing exercise, and then go back to it. Just clear your mind. It's like a palette of paint where all the colors are all over each other, and you just need to bring it back. So blue and green and red and yellow are all the places where they should be.
We'll be right back. The Tourette Association of America is the premier nonprofit working to raise awareness, advance research, and provide ongoing support to those with Tourette syndrome or tic disorder. With a network of over 130 chapters, support groups, and centers of excellence, the TAA engages with communities across the nation in an effort to provide tools, webinars, workshops, and support for all seeking assistance. As a primary sponsor of Tourette's podcast,
The TAA supports the authentic conversations showcasing the diverse representation of the TS community. To learn more, visit Tourette.org. TOURETTE.org.
You said there were certain people in your life who knew your story with TS. What about when you were younger? I mean, was there any sort of intention to kind of bottle it up? I mean, that's my story. I was not open about it. I was embarrassed about it, ashamed. And you made the point earlier. I mean, a lot of people deal with that into their adult lives. Some people never open up about it because of that fear of disenfranchisement, stunting themselves professionally, relationships, that kind of thing. Were you open or closed about it? Or what was your younger years like and your teens and so on?
So I got diagnosed at 7, just after 7, when a couple of tics had started. We didn't really know what it was. Our local GP had no idea what it could be. And so it was a teacher at school who, during one of the parents' evenings, my parents were talking to Mrs. Morrison, good old Mrs. Morrison. And she said, you know what? I think it could be something called Tourette syndrome. I just watched a documentary about 2 weeks ago, and there was, 5-minute segment with someone who had Tourette syndrome. I think it could be that.
Huh.
And so my mum started delving into a bit more info on it, and she thought, oh my goodness, it could be this. And so then she contacted a comedian who was in London who had Tourette syndrome. And he was like, yeah, it sounds like your son could have that. You should try, get it diagnosed. So we came down to what's called Great Ormond Street in London, which had it's a children's hospital, and it had a specialist kind of neurology department. Mm-hmm. And within about 10 minutes of being in the room, I was diagnosed. Was it a taboo subject for me growing up? Absolutely.
Yeah.
And to the point where I don't know, in terms of the association of the word, but the word Tourette syndrome, the word Tourette, the word Tourette's, any kind of formulation of those words was strictly forbidden from the house. I could not bear to hear those words. It had to be TS. It had to be an abbreviation or a code word for it. It was something that whenever I heard those words, I would instantly go into an anxiety-driven panic.
Yeah.
And, I remember being about 16, and in the UK, we have these 2 massive festivals called Leeds Festival and Reading Festival.
Right.
I lived near Leeds, and I wasn't old enough to go, but I was sitting there with some friends in the middle of the square in Leeds, watching on the big screen, a performance took place. And then a comedian called Ricky Gervais came up. Mm-hmm. And you know what? I think the guy is a great comedian. He tells great jokes. He's got a really dry sense of humor. Some people, he annoys the living hell out of them, but I quite liked him, and sitting there laughing at his jokes with my friends. And then he said the word Tourette syndrome. He was like, oh, I've got Tourette. And instantly, life pretty much stopped for me. I remember being white flush. I was thinking, oh my God, all my friends, they must be looking at me. Everyone around me must be looking at me.
Yeah.
And of course, no one was. They couldn't have cared less. They were just going about their everyday lives. But just the word, it was such an uncomfortable word for me. And so, I definitely had that experience growing up. And I'd say that it was only in the past 4 years where I'd actually be able to say the word in front of other people. And I think that we're fortunate in a way that, we might not have had as much support growing up from various circles, but because we found this passion and this thing that we enjoy doing, it's enabled us to have the confidence to come out. So this would be the second time I've come out as gay, and now with Tourette's.
Yeah.
And it enables us to do that, and that's why the Tourette Association is fantastic with the ambassador program and really empowering people to talk about it so openly and just fly the flag. And I just think that is such an incredible thing. I wish there was something like that when I was growing up, because that would have made such a profound difference to just managing it. I mean, when I was about 8 years old in school, I remember being called every name under the sun by some pupils. And there was one kid who, I remember the very first time someone brought it up in public at school, and I had a bit of a neck jerk. And I must have been at this age about 8. And I remember this kid who was about 5 years older than me just walking up to me with a bunch of his friends, pointing at me and going, "Look at that spastic." And
Yeah.
it's like, whoa. At that point, like, I couldn't even cry. I just froze. I felt so numb, and I didn't know what the hell to do. I just walked away, hid myself in a classroom for, the whole of the lunch break. And for the whole week, I didn't say anything.
Wow.
And now there's a lot more awareness, thank goodness. There needs to be a heck of a lot more. And that's why we're doing what we're doing here, to try and spread this message. But kids will be kids. Some kids will be a hell of a lot nastier than others, and some have a great emotional intelligence, and they'll come to your defense. I experienced both growing up and being at school. But the more awareness that we can get out there about what Tourette is, and just general ways in which people can be aware of it and help kids feel more comfortable in their own skin, the better.
It's such a good point. I remember my late 20s maybe, and one of my good friends referred to me as, and the sentence was, "But you're weird," kind of like that. And it was kind of traumatic for me, because I immediately went inward, and I probably had the same kind of cold feeling like you were talking about. And I was imagining, have I had this false confidence kind of growing up into my 20s? I played music and I played in bands, and, you get a sense of confidence, if people like what you're doing. And I was reevaluating everything just because of, I guess, being termed as weird. It's like, is that something everybody's always thought about me? I didn't, maybe it's true. Yeah. But I didn't think other people thought that. I thought I was doing a good job of, kind of coming off socially viable. And, way later down the road, I don't associate the word weird with bad. I associate it with good, but at that time, it was just such a draining thing. I don't think I've never necessarily been the same since. I haven't looked at myself the same since. And when I was younger, I had a pen pal with TS, but I didn't have a community. And I would go to conferences when I was a little kid, but it was before I knew that it was something people would want to make fun of. So I, decided to cut ties with it. Tourette is not something people are going to know about me. What I see nowadays, I guess, with social media and Instagram and everything, with the younger people, the ambassador program, TikTok channels and YouTube channels. I mean, there's so much amazing stuff going on with the younger people now. And for other people who were their age to see themselves represented in that way and have it be, I wouldn't say it's normalized yet, but there's a context where it can feel normal and okay. Just giving other people the chance to see that and see people express things and use terminology that sounds familiar to them innately. And, it just has this nice family kind of club kind of feeling that I think could be way bigger than it is with the Tourette community. It's underdiagnosed. It's not talked about in all cultures, and just finding those connections. I mean, that's a life-changing thing, and certainly has been for me with the podcast. That was the origin of the whole podcast, was wanting to, connect with people to soften my thoughts about myself in a way. So there was a selfish angle to it, but I really did want to talk to other people who shared that kind of experience. And then you end up being surprised by how similar it can be. Tics that you didn't think anybody else had, or thought processes that you didn't, rituals throughout your day that you thought were just exclusive to yourself. And I hope that ends up translating to other things that people deal with, an insecurity within yourself. And when we all start talking about this stuff more openly, it just becomes easier to have a conversation about what's quote unquote wrong with you. And I found that at my day job, since I kind of, came out, so to speak, on having TS, people have brought their personal stories to me because they feel more comfortable telling them to me, I guess, knowing that I have some sort of angle to relate, having something that might be misunderstood in some way.
I'd say that it is a relief, definitely, knowing other people with TS. And honestly, I think I'm just at the very start of that journey, because I still know very few people who have Tourette. But since I've been so open and will continue to be open about my life, more and more people are coming into my life, telling me their stories and opening up. And I'd say that another thing, especially with folks like ourselves, is because of what we've been through, our emotional intelligence increases. And, we have just a broader, I wouldn't say broader cultural idea, a broader emotional intelligence in general. Mm-hmm. And when people come to us with their dilemmas and their issues, we can think about them in a way that they wouldn't necessarily. And I think especially right now with everything that's happening with COVID-19, anxiety is massive all around the world.
Oh, yeah.
And one thing that I've tried to do is say to people, look, here are the coping mechanisms I use when my tics get really bad and I have a lot of anxiety. Why don't you try them and just see how you feel? And the amount of people who've come back and said, oh my God, like, firstly, thank you so much, because that's incredible. My anxiety went away. And secondly, how the hell do you deal with so much anxiety in your life and constantly having to do this? It really changes our perspective on the world. It does.
Truly. And when you were younger, when you did have such a, I guess, traumatic relationship with even the words Tourette syndrome, was that to say that it sounded like you had some understanding at home and parental support, but was it something that you were not pursuing in terms of medication, or was this just something you were really trying to kind of push to the back?
So I was put on something called Dixerit in the UK, and I never wanted to take pills ever. I never wanted to take any form of medication.
Yeah.
And when I was put on that, I used to be quite an athletic kid. And the minute I started taking it, one of the side effects is putting on weight. And I instantly started to put on weight. And so that just fueled bullying in other areas. And I just remember, I'd come down in the morning in the kitchen. It'd be like, right, have you taken your Dixerit? And I was like, yeah. And they'd be like, no, I need to watch you take it. And I'd hide it on my tongue and then just spit it down the toilet because I didn't want to take it. It made me feel like there was something. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a scientist. My personal feeling is that kids, and I know that everyone's symptoms are different. My tics were quite severe at that point, but I am a believer that natural remedies are the best. And Dixerit did absolutely nothing for me. It only made my life worse. And I know that, we're talking about 20 years ago now, and the world has changed. There are more scientific developments. But I'm a big believer that if you can have more of a natural remedy, things like CBT, then do it. Because at the end of the day, that's better for your mind than putting something in your body. And again, I'm not a doctor. I'm not a scientist. I'm not an expert in that field. They're just my personal opinions.
I do find that with my well-being, when I'm just generally feeling okay and feeling safe on my own terms, that's when I kind of feel better about everything else. There's that relationship between tics and stress and tics and anxiety. And it can be cyclical too, because you can tic in a public space and maybe develop some anxiety or personal stress about yourself. And then that ends up leading to more ticking. I find that the more I research, and I use research very loosely, but the more I look into my own anxiety and what sets me off and what anxiety is to begin with. We had this episode a while back with Dr. John Walkup where, it's a natural thing. It's an evolutionary thing. It's something that we all experience. Kind of recognizing it for what it is and then being able to kind of take it on its own terms has been way better for me. And certain painful tics that I've had, like neck tics, will definitely come out when I'm under a more anxious or stressful situation. And since I've been exploring that kind of thing of just finding some sense of identity with my anxiety, it's scaled back a lot. And I don't have these painful tics like I would have. It's a thought process and it's a sense of happiness, and that cools out my tics and is not the case for everybody, but I definitely find that to be true about myself.
Yeah, the calmer you feel and the more comfortable you feel in your own body and your own environment. I think that, one thing, people with Tourette syndrome can be very driven people. And with that in itself comes a lot of stress and anxiety. So in a way, we're our own worst enemy, aren't we? But, I find myself when I work in co-working spaces sometimes during the day, because I just like to have kind of a different sense of environment. And obviously for the past couple of months, that's not been possible because of the situation. We call it lockdown. I know that in the US, it's called something slightly different. Stay at home, I think it's called. And just recently, because London is now starting to open back up, I've been going to a couple of very socially distanced co-working spaces. And I always notice that my tics seem to be quite a lot more prominent in those kind of situations when I'm sitting there doing some work and there's other people around me. And then I start thinking to myself, oh no, I'm going to start annoying this poor person next to me. But then I kind of look around and and they're fine. They don't care. And I do a little breathing for 10 seconds and I go back to it. One little trick that I use to really calm down my tics is just super simple. Just breathing, just acknowledging your breathing in and out while you work on a particular task. And it is almost like meditation and focus in itself, just rhythmic breathing. And it's the same system that allows me to get to sleep as well in the evening, just rhythmic breathing in and out while focusing on the task.
That's another thing that is, I feel like, just kind of so in front of me all the time, just the automated process of breathing, that I don't think about the intentional breathing and using it to kind of manipulate how I feel. But when I was in therapy a little while back, that was a huge thing for me. It's resetting, and it can just kind of take you out of your space for a minute. You're kind of waking back up in a way and sending a different signal to your brain. It's also important to remember too that we do work ourselves up with anxiety in these sort of social situations, especially if it's a quiet place. Maybe you know, I couldn't go to a library and feel comfortable with it. You know, in the sense of like pulling out books and studying there, that kind of thing. I would feel way too self-conscious, and then I would start ticking, and then that would just kind of compound. But it is important to realize, or at least remember, that people are kind of caught up in their own thing too, and they're not just kind of waiting for you to do something. That they're not hyper conscious of your tics like you are. You know, the more we remind ourselves of that, at least for me, the more comfortable I feel in the moment, and it does also at the same time make me more conscious and comfortable in maybe noisy environments too. You know, hardware stores or just kind of being out on the street where there's traffic noise. It's a really nice thing to just kind of get out and walk. You're also kind of in a context where there's such a huge diversity of people, depending on where you are, of course, but such a huge diversity of people. They've got their own thing going on. And where I used to be kind of horrified at the thought of walking around ticking, it's kind of no big deal, and nobody ever notices now. And if they did, I don't necessarily care anymore.
And that's exactly it. You know, there'll be people on the underground or the tube or, you know, whatnot. And if it's been a particularly stressful day, I think our tics come out a bit more. And you see that person looking over at you like, what the hell is wrong with that person? And then your anxiety comes out a bit more. And I've had a couple of people obviously sit there thinking that I'm some kind of, you know, I have an addiction problem or something, and I'm about to steal their phone or
right.
pull out a knife on them. And they move down the carriage because they're freaked out. And one of my main things to kind of get across to people is if you see someone on a mode of transport or on a park bench or wherever, and they have a twitch, you know, or a tic or anything which is mild vocal, you know, don't stare, don't feel uncomfortable, just smile. Because the best thing you can do is just kind of smile at them and be like, yeah, it's cool. I get you. I think I know what you have. I know what you're going through. You keep doing what you need to do. And then we're like, oh, great. Oh my gosh, what a relief. And then it just goes down. It's the kind of corner of the eye staring. What is wrong with that person? Yeah. What is going on? I'm concerned. I'm worried. It produces that kind of hay bale effect. Or what's the word I'm looking for? Not hail effect, but it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. I forgot the terminology for it.
Like the snowball.
Snowball effect. That's the exact word that I'm looking for.
It's so true that the more sly and inconspicuous they try to be with gawking at you, the more obvious they are to people who are hyper conscious of their own tics. It's like, it's so important for people to hear this. Don't do the side eye thing, please.
No, oh my God, please don't. Just smile. All you can do is smile. That's it. That's the best thing to do.
Yeah, there's really nothing like feeling like you're with safe company.
Do you know what? Again, spot on. And it's slightly unrelated, but, you know, talking about times when our tics are good or bad, I always find that when I'm not in a relationship at the minute, that when I'm in bed sleeping and I'm by myself, I find that my tics can be quite prominent. Really interesting thing is when I'm in bed with someone who I'm dating or whatnot, and I just feel comfortable, my tics are almost non-existent in bed. It's such an interesting thing that I've come to notice over the years. When you have that level of comfort when you're going to sleep, your mind is again completely distracted. You feel that kind of belonging, that comfort, that safety net, and the tics are almost completely gone. That's been a kind of very intriguing observation that I've had over the years.
Does curious, and I know this answer would be just exclusive to your experience, but does alcohol affect your tics at all?
Um, yes, in positive and negative ways, I would
Yeah.
say. Positive in that, it affects the nerves and whatnot, and it blocks out signals. So in some instances, it completely distracts me from the fact that I have TS at all, and the tics completely disappear. However, on the opposite side of that scale, if I become a bit more anxious about something because you have had alcohol, then it can make them a little bit worse. Um, I currently, despite my profession, at the moment, I do not drink from Sunday to Thursday. I'm only drinking on Friday and Saturday. And, with the exception of when I'm judging or I'm tasting spirits, which I always spit. So last
Right.
Monday, I had to judge 75 tequilas in a row within 4 hours.
Wow.
And that's an interesting experience. But,
bet.
you wash your mouth out with water. You have crackers there that you munch on to, rejuvenate your palate, so to speak.
Yeah.
And you just get on with it. Like you do in any profession, you find that norm and you just keep going with it. But one thing that I would say to people is definitely, don't drink to try and get rid of the tics at all.
Absolutely.
You shouldn't do that.
I stand with you on that. So what's ahead for you? Do you have any new projects coming up? What's ahead for the Three Drinkers? And
Yeah, so right now we are in pre-production for our next series, and our next series we start filming in October to come out in spring 2021. So that's the big thing that's going on right now that's taking up a lot of time. And then just generally working on a lot of our online stuff. We have a podcast too. It's very different from this podcast. It's a lot more about the whimsical world of drinks and kind of delving into our lives, what we get up to, what we're exploring.
is it of the same title?
It's called Bring a Bottle.
Bring a Bottle.
Bring a Bottle. It is indeed. And it kind of draws upon each of our specialties with, what we're getting up to. So, for example, Helena, the lovely Helena Nicklin, who is my lovely co-presenter, she came out with something called Vinologies, which is where she takes an analogy for a particular wine. And so in each episode, she will make a sound or a noise, and we have to try and guess which grape variety she's talking about. I think I have gotten one correct out of about 13. But she's fantastic when it comes to all that kind of stuff. So much creativity. One thing that I will say about wine in general, and one tool that I love to use is something called Vivino. And oftentimes we walk into a store and there are so many wines there, we have no idea what to go for.
Mm-hmm.
And it's literally an app on the phone. You take a picture of a bottle of wine and it will tell you people's thoughts and the score of a wine, but based on 43 million people across the world.
Okay.
And so it takes it away from that one individual and their very objective view. These wine professionals who do point scores of wines, and it takes it to the masses. And that's a company, I've been working with them for about 7 years. And I have to say, they have changed the world of wine as it has been known and just made it so much more approachable to people from all walks of life who walk into the store feeling so overwhelmed with what's in front of them. And so, if you're the type of person who likes wine, download this app called Vivino, go into the store, take pictures of the wines and just see what the tasting notes are, see what the scores are, and see if it's something that you would enjoy. Allow that to kind of guide you in the right direction. I could talk about wine and spirits all day. And I know we've only got an hour, but it's such a lovely world. And never let someone tell you that a wine is bad or good. I'll go back to what I said at the very beginning of this podcast. A good wine is a wine that you enjoy drinking, and that's all it should ever be.
This has really been fantastic. It's been a pleasure, and I like the ground we covered too. It had kind of a different lens on it.
I think what you are doing, Ben, is absolutely fantastic because you are helping people who have had Tourette syndrome, who have just come out with it, who've had it for a while. But what you're doing is allowing them to tell their stories and allowing other people to just organically find this podcast delve into that world, have a better understanding, and then you arm them with the ability to just spread that with the world. And the same for the Tourette Association. So I think, thank you to both of you for doing that, because at the end of the day, I'm just one piece of the puzzle, or the jigsaw as it is. But, all we can do is work together to keep putting those pieces together, so we create a big global jigsaw of Tourette syndrome awareness.
I love
that was
it.
a terrible analogy, but we'll just go with it. I feel like there's only one more thing both of us can do now, and that's go get a glass of something and unwind and enjoy the evening.
That's on tap for me, and I'll let you enjoy your margarita. One of my photography clients is a Mexican restaurant, and that's my night.
I love it. I think one thing, please ask them to do this at some point in time, but if they have it, Patron Reposado, Grand Marnier, a little bit of vanilla syrup, lime, and no salt rim. I find that the salt rim on margaritas, for me, it ruins it. The only time you should have salt rim on a margarita is when it's such a bad margarita you can't bear to try it without. And that shouldn't be a thing. People shouldn't be drinking a drink to get wasted and get drunk. People should be drinking to truly enjoy what's in the glass. Mixology is like a form of art. And this is the last thing I'll say. We probably won't even include this part, but I say that mixology it's like a form of art, right? You've got your palate, and your palate is like your shaker. It's like your spoon. It's like your strainer. It's like your glass. And then on the palette, you've got all these paints, and you've got the blue, the red, all of these individual paints are like the vodka, the tequila, the syrup, the lime, the lemon, the egg white, all these components that make a cocktail. So then you take your brush, or, your chalk or your paint, and you have your canvas, and you paint this amazing picture. That is exactly what mixology is. It's a form of art. It's bringing together all of these different ingredients, all of these different paints or processes, and creating something that is just a form of beauty. And not many people really appreciate that is what mixology is at the end of the day. It's hard. Mixology is very hard to get something right, something really good right. It can be hard. It's a craft.
Science and creativity. That's such a beautiful thing to bring together. And then the appreciation you develop, once you know that that's the case, or you come to the awareness that this is something that, some thought was put into it. That's that just kind of changes the entire experience.
Oh, it really does. And it's like drinking an old wine. A lot of people think that it's pretentious to drink an old vintage wine, and each their own. You've got to do what you enjoy doing. I have cried drinking certain wines because it's from a certain era where I think, oh my goodness, what happened during this year? The winemaker who made this is no longer alive, and this was made generations ago.
Yeah.
And you're just kind of sitting there thinking, what was happening in the world whilst this amazing product was being created? And just to think about the history that's involved with wines and with spirits, it just opens so many new kind of doors of discovery and appreciation for what's in the glass.
Aidy, I appreciate this so much.
Thank you so much, Ben. Have a lovely weekend. And yeah, here's raising a glass to Tourette syndrome. Cheers.
Cheers. Thanks so much to Aidy Smith for spending some time with us. I've included a link to the3drinkers.com in the show notes with this episode at tourettespodcast.com, but it may be more simple for you to remember the3drinkers.com. Watch it. It's a beautiful show. You'll learn a lot. Aidy, thank you for taking us out. That was perfect. I've got to give some more thanks. Sophia has been there since the beginning. She's our discussion group admin. Actually, she said she and her brother have been watching Aidy's show. Sophia, thank you for everything you do for the podcast and for the community. Thanks to Elizabeth McDonald, who created the new podcast logo that debuted this season. Thanks to Bandrew Scott, who runs the Geeks Rising network that Tourette's podcast is proudly part of. Not just a great podcaster and audio expert, but Bandrew is also a great person and support system. Great to talk with and work problems out with. Heather Welch of the Sunshine and Power Cuts podcast. Same thing. She actually helped greatly with Geeks Rising's participation in Livestream for the Cure, which raised a lot of money for cancer research. That's a close-to-home topic for me. And obviously, major thanks to the Tourette Association of America for doing so much for Tourette's podcast and for the greater community. They've been doing a lot of new things that are a real lift for the TS community overall. They're being a champion of equal rights and helping one another when we need to. Tourette.org for more info and Tourette.org/events to check out what they have coming up. They often have webinars and other events like that, which you can also find on their YouTube channel. So it's free. You can look up providers at Tourette.org. You can check out comprehensive toolkits. If you financially support the Tourette Association, you help this stuff exist, which helps all kinds of people. And just to read it, this is straight off Tourette.org. Our goal is to ensure that everyone impacted receives equal access to programs, resources, and support, as well as treatment and care, regardless of age, race, gender, sexuality, ethnicity, religion, or income. That's from the Tourette Association, and they're at Tourette.org, and I'm so grateful for their support, making the podcast possible. I'll have details at some point about Season 6. If you'd like to do an episode, email me at tourettespodcast@gmail.com. Of course, I have a limit on how many I can do per season, but I would love to hear from you. Tell me a bit about yourself, tourettespodcast@gmail.com, or use the contact form at tourettespodcast.com. I read everything that comes in. Patreon.com/tourettespodcast if you'd like to provide individual support to the podcast. Thank you to everybody who is. I'll be in touch in the meantime, whether that's in the Tourette's Podcast discussion group or on Twitter, that handle being at Tourette'sPod, and on Instagram. Thank you guys for being the best. Like this whole time through 5 seasons, everybody's been so positive and supportive. That's it for Season 5. Send me your thoughts. I'll be in touch. Thanks. This is Ben.